Hey everybody, and welcome to the YouTube character profile re-upload of Derek Wilton, which we recorded way back in episode 95 of Conversation Street. So this was done a couple of years after the podcast started. Obviously, Peter Baldwin, who played Derek Wilton, sadly passed away a few years ago. So in the discussion that you're about to hear, we talk a little bit about going to Covent Garden, where he had a shop, and meeting with him and stuff. We actually got a quote from him, which is cool, isn't it? We wrote to him, and he's got an exclusive Coronation Street quote, but obviously really, really sad to hear that he passed away a few years ago. But it doesn't detract from our love of Derek, of course. In fact, we've grown to love Derek more, which we'll talk a little bit more about on the other side of this. So enough wittering for now. Let's play this character profile, and we'll be back on the other side just with a few updated opinions on the master of the paperclip himself. So our character profile this week was inspired by what happened at the fun run on Friday to poor Lloyd, who suffered a bit of a heart attack after the race. Yeah. And the character this week also had a heart attack, but unfortunately for him, that's what finished him off. It's Derek Wilton.
Oh,
One half Wilton of the Mavis and Derek double act, and Mavis was obviously a double act with Rita as well. So.
Wow, what a lucky lady.
I know. Well, let's go down a bit of Derek's stats first. So he was born on the 8th of August 1936 and died on the 7th of April 1997. His parents were Lionel and Amy Wilton, and he had two sisters, Edith and Doreen.
They don't make names like that anymore, do they?
That's old people's names.
He was married to Angela Hawthorne in 1985 and Mavis Riley in 1988. He first appeared on the 23rd of February 1976. He last appeared when he died on the 7th of April 1997. He's been in 726 episodes, 69th most featured character, and he was played by Peter Baldwin.
Yes. Now, I started watching Coronation Street in the mid-90s, so I was able to see Mavis and Derek for their final few years together, and I remember Derek's death episode, and it had all been, it was quite very big in the papers at the time, because it was Brian Park, the producer, that swung the axe on poor Derek. But I think I really came to have an appreciation of the character when I watched the classic episodes on Granada Plus when they were repeated, because that was like all throughout the 80s, and Mavis and Derek were quite big characters there, and it was good to be able to see the beginnings of their relationships, which were comical to say the least, because Derek was very much an early Norris Cole in lots of ways, and in fact Derek was the character who introduced us to Norris Cole, which we find out how that happened later. He was just like an elderly, well, not elderly, he was an older man, I guess, a kind of midlife and going through a bit.
Do you mean middle-aged?
Yes, middle-aged man. Middle-aged to older middle-aged, and he was just very, very serious. He was quite kind of pretentious, and he looked down on other people. He didn't have a sense of humour.
Cross between Norris and Sally and Roy.
Yeah, kind of. He didn't have a sense of humour, but I think he thought he did have a sense of humour. But
we all know those.
he was always getting into sort of battles with Des Barnes, next door neighbour, but Derek always came out the worse for them. And I think lots of people liked the Wiltons as a couple, but it was also kind of funny to see sort of the pretentious smile white off Derek's face as well, if I'm remembering it right at least. So let's go back and see how he came into the programme then.
Well, in 1976 he was working as a furniture sales representative, and he ended up meeting Mavis after he stopped in at the cabin to ask for directions. You wouldn't get that these days, you just get your smartphone out, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
He asked her out for a drink. She tried to take it a bit further by cooking him a romantic meal, but he wanted to consult his mother before any potential love interests. And Mrs. Wilton told him that Mavis and Derek are too alike, and so he calls it off. Yeah,
it's a bit. Who was the other character who had the mum kind of that was calling the shots?
Sophie.
No, there was or maybe I'm just thinking of the character that Peter Kay played when he had that date with Shelley Unwin, and his mum was there. And,
yeah.
So
that was so bizarre.
He was a bit of a mummy's boy. I think he must have lived with his parents or something back then, even as middle-aged as he was.
In 1977, he came back But Mavis's nasty aunt and cousin tried to wreck their relationship because Mavis had been looking after her aunt, Edie, who'd had a heart attack. But then Edie dies. Phew. So Derek offers to support Mavis financially, because she has to buy somewhere to live, but then his mum again forbids it.
Yes. Yeah, Mavis was always a bit of a diller, and she needed somebody really to
take her under their wing.
Yeah.
So
she was very trusting of him.
In 1978, Derek's mum meddles yet again. She sets him up to marry the domineering Beryl Chalice.
Chalice, I don't know.
Chalice, and he appeals to Mavis to help him escape the engagement. But Beryl discovers them together and calls it off herself. But Derek is not interested in any more romance at the moment, so Mavis is left disappointed.
Yet again.
Which is quite sad, because that was the perfect moment for him to swoop down and sweep her off her feet and ride off into the distance, just like Dennis and Gloria.
Oh, yeah.
Those naughty
In these early years, Derek was just like a recurring character, so we'd come in it for a few episodes every year.
Come in it for a few episodes and disappoint Mavis.
Yeah, exactly, that's what it was. It was kind of a comedy reappearance of Derek, I think. 1979 was the next one, which was when he began to work at Sandy Croft's Confectioners.
Now that's a man to bag.
Well, he was a salesman by trade, and he had lots of different...
Did he have a briefcase full of, like, jelly beans?
Oh, probably.
If you had, can you imagine if you were caught outside of school with that? You'd be arrested as a pedo, wouldn't you?
These days you would.
Yeah. Well, he tried to get Mavis to help him to win a Salesman of the Month award, and this involved her buying a large amount of chocolate bunnies off of him, but he ended up coming up in third place. So it wasn't enough.
Well, it's still good enough. I mean, he got a load of prize money, but he gave it to his mum. That's who it reminded me of. It was wasn't it Jesse, Eileen's fella, who didn't he go on a cruise, and Eileen thought that he was gonna take her, but he ended up taking his mum.
There's
Do you
another
remember
story
that?
about cruises in just a minute. Rita tells Derek
Oh yeah, that's
he is
what I
a
was
louse.
thinking of.
So what you're saying is that Derek reminds you of Derek.
No, Jesse.
Right. In 1982, which was the best year, Derek reappears on... That was when I was born. Derek reappears on the street with the news that his mother has died. Thank God for
no
that.
More interfering.
Right. He gets Mavis all aflutter because he says, "Can you help me look through some cruise brochures?" So she does, excitedly, only to find out that he's actually taking his sister on a cruise, not her.
So many times she
Derek,
gets her hopes up.
Derek, you've gone and screwed up again.
In 1984, he was back again. This time with a marriage proposal for Mavis.
It took him 2 years, but he finally realised what women really want.
Him. Yes.
A rock on the finger.
On Rita's advice, Mavis accepted, but her old flame, Victor Pendlebury, also proposed during their engagement party.
Fiancés are like buses, aren't they? You wait 20 years for one and then two turn up at once.
Yeah, well, Derek won't get rid of Victor, so Mavis has to do it herself.
Has to marry him.
Get rid of him. But she's unsure still about how much she actually loves Derek. This was quite funny because they were getting ready to get married, and then on the day of the wedding, Mavis was getting more and more unsure about it, about this kind of bloke Derek that's been in and out of her life and always letting her down and putting other people in front of her. So she decided to jilt him, but Derek had already decided to jilt her himself. So all the guests were there at the church waiting for them, and neither the bride nor the groom turned up.
Now that is actually hilarious.
Yeah, well, this storyline had legs, really, because in 1985, the following year, the papers got hold of this double jilting story, and they reported about it. So Mavis and Derek kind of became a bit of a laughing stock, even more in Weatherfield. Derek accused Mavis in print of being a scarlet woman, and then Mavis replied the next day. So they were like having this argument through the letters page.
Connections that you get in the Metro paper.
Yeah, well, it turns out that Mavis's reply was twisted a little bit for the tabloid.
That's what we do. We just twist everything.
Yeah.
It's probably so they could fit it on the line. That's what I do.
Well, later that year, off screen, Derek married his boss's daughter Angela, and Angela was quite
evil.
Yeah, she was quite evil, and I remember when I watched it in the 90s, I don't remember seeing Angela very much at all. And like, for some time, I thought that she was one of these characters that was like heard about off screen but never seen. But she certainly was in it. Yeah, I thought she was a bit of a fat Brenda, this kind of evil wife cracking the whip back at home. But she was in scenes. I just didn't remember seeing her very much.
You just didn't watch it.
No.
Well, he came back in 1986 for Mavis's help to get rid of Angela because she's a nightmare. He can't cope. He needs support. So they end up meeting together in secret. But they nearly get caught by evil Angela's evil son, the evil Neville. He's even got the word evil in his name.
Oh yeah, Neville. Neville. In 1987, he decided to leave Angela, which is very brave of him because he was, I think,
really.
Well, he was a bit. I think he was probably a bit shy and a bit not very forthcoming. Yeah, oh yeah, he did. Oh yeah, he chickened out in the end. He thought that she was seeing someone else, so he sent Mavis out to go and spy on them. So Mavis was doing a bit of a private detective job, but then it transpired that the person that Derek thought was having an affair with Angela was actually a private eye that Angela had hired to spy on Mavis and Derek, because she thought that they were having a little secret.
See, you should just trust each other.
Yeah, well,
everyone should just love and respect
Angela started divorce proceedings after all of this, and Derek ended up with a handsome payoff which he used to buy a stationery firm in Cornwall. That was at the end of 1987.
See, that's just near Devon. If he'd just stayed there, then Ben could have come down to visit him.
Yeah. 1988, Derek missed Manchester, so he went back up north to work for a stationery firm, Barker's, which Mavis was unwittingly applying for a job at. I think she must have got bored of the cabin or something. I think having Derek as like his final profession being a stationer kind of says a lot about his personality, because it's a bit like geeky and nerdy and a bit kind of dry.
Also, like literally the word stationery.
Yeah, not going anywhere.
Exactly.
Different spelling, but it's like having The Office being about a paper firm, isn't it? It's like, what's the most boring thing? And both of us like stationery shops, like seeing all the different coloured pens and things.
The best thing about being at school was always September, when you had all your new stationery and your notebook and your pens and I loved it.
Well, you'd have gone out, you'd have married Derek, wouldn't you?
I'd be like, Derek, show me your spiral bound A4 notebook, baby.
Well, anyway, Mavis was having this job interview with Derek at the interview there, but he didn't even offer a job. But he did offer her his hand in marriage, so...
Yeah, but how much does it pay?
Well, he did have that payoff from Angela, remember?
Okay, then.
But I mean, he couldn't propose to her through the letterbox, because she was so annoyed that he hadn't, as a friend, offered her this job, that she was refusing to talk to him.
Did he actually be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're not qualified"?
I don't remember. But he said he wouldn't give her the job, so she went back home. And then she was.
What? So being a wife is less demanding, is it? Than
apparently.
Whoa, you should see the things that they... Timekeeping, culinary arts, laundry, service.
Well, she was there at home or at the cabin, I can't remember, and he was calling through the letterbox, asking her to marry him, and that's quite kind of a famous Corrie proposal. And nobody thought it was a good idea, because Derek had been so flaky in the past, but she needed somebody, and she was so trusting that she accepted his proposal, and they got married at last. 10 years after they'd met each other, and I think everybody always knew that they were destined for each other.
So like Ross and Rachel and Friends.
Yeah.
In 1989, they decide to move away to a posh bungalow, but Derek offers way below the asking price and loses the sale. Whoops. And he also wants Mavis to resign from the cabin because he thinks it's beneath her, which doesn't make sense because she's not good enough for a stationery shop. He fails a company medical because apparently it's essential that all salespeople are in tip-top condition. And this is obviously an echo of the future because he didn't pass that health check.
Oh, yeah.
And he gets moved from sales to dispatch, which is obviously less taxing. What? He's packing boxes? That's a young man's game. Just ask Kirk. He resigns, but he suffers from a breakdown after trying to keep the news from Mavis.
Yeah, so then he began to sell novelties to toy shops.
Toy shops?
But he was
Really?
sacked at Christmas. Yes, really. And that's another very famous scene when that happened, because he was at the office Christmas do dressed up as Santa. I think it must have been a fancy dress, because I don't think he had all the people sitting on his knee asking what they wanted for Christmas. But he was Father Christmas, but he was accidentally locked in the storeroom. So then he had to climb out of a window. And then kind of shimmy along the walls high above Weatherfield, and there's this brilliant scene of Jack down on street level, like with I think he's got a pint in his hand, looks up and he can see this little Father Christmas shimmying along the rooftops in the distance, and Jack just does this look like he's like, oh, I think I've had a bit too much to drink. Very funny scene, that one.
You saw Father Christmas once,
I
didn't
did.
you?
I saw Father Christmas, definitely. He was in my back garden when I was little.
How old were you?
I don't remember, 6. I'm convinced.
That's awesome.
Sure, I saw him. Maybe it was Derek.
Tell the story.
It was just in my grandma's house. We'd gone there for Christmas, and I looked out the window and Father Christmas was there. It's true.
And what did old Granny used to put in your milk before you went to bed?
Well, that's what I
That's
think.
a really
anyway.
good story. I like that story.
I know that
So-
it's one of the stories from childhood that I
I
honestly
just
remember.
wish I could
Just-
look in your head to see what you were seeing.
I know. I barely remember it myself, but
It wasn't snowing, was it?
no, there was just a figure in
strolling
the
along.
garden. But I'm sure it was
Probably
a
a
dream.
burglar. Right, so he gets sacked.
Yes,
Yeah.
basically.
So in 1990, he unwillingly takes a job at the stationery company owned by Mavis's ex, Victor.
Well, who'd want to work for him?
He uses it as a chance to get closer to Mavis.
Yeah, so Derek was very jealous because of Victor being a rival for Mavis's affections
Well,
in
Mavis
the past.
doesn't realise that there's this rivalry going on. And it gets to the point that Derek wants a divorce from her, calls her a Jezebel, because he comes home one day and finds Victor massaging her feet. And she's like, oh, I didn't know.
I don't really know what's the matter. So Victor admitted defeat in the end anyway. And by the end of the year, he was married to someone else. 1991, Derek was threatened. This is funny. Threatened with a lawsuit
ridiculous.
when he slaps a co-worker's bum. I've put an apostrophe in slaps there. That's
Yeah, you
terrible.
have.
After
Let me just slap you ceremoniously.
Thanks. Mavis gave him parsnips as an aphrodisiac because she
Now
apparently
this
found that
disturbs me, because when we have Sunday lunch, my dad has all the parsnips.
parsnips are a bit of a dad food, aren't they? Maybe that's what mums across the country are doing when it's Sunday dinner.
My mum always gives everyone a big wink when she...
Eat your parsnips, Steve.
Right, clear off, kids.
I'd never heard of parsnips being an
I just
aphrodisiac
thought they
outside
made
the
you
coronation.
fart. Sorry, Dad, I gave away your secret.
Anyway,
1992, he made himself redundant. How can you do that? Oh, you sort of fall on the sword, don't you?
no,
he paper products.
No, he was. He did a little survey to find out where he could cut costs, and he realised that his own job was unnecessary. So Victor was like, "Oh, fine, don't need you anymore then." Rita had planned to move to Florida and sell the cabin to Mavis, though, so it was going to be okay, and she was going to give them her flat. So he turns
Rita's
down
full of
a
empty
well-paid,
promises.
he turned down a well-paid furniture sales job, but then Rita pulled out at the last minute. But she did agree to put Mavis in charge of the cabin for a bit with Derek there as her assistant. Didn't really work though, because he's used to life on the open road. He couldn't stand behind the counter for the rest of his life. And he caused a bit of a nuisance because a bit like Roy, he didn't necessarily know how to interact
with
socially
people.
sometimes, unless it was on from a sales kind of perspective. So the paper boys all went on strike, and by the end of the year he was a caretaker at Weatherfield Comp. 1993 was when the war against his neighbour Des Barnes kind of really got into the swing of it. One of the things that happened was Des's mate had put his camper van outside the street, and Mavis and Derek both thought it was a bit of an eyesore, so Des got a crane and put it into the Wilton's garden instead.
So you say this is a wages war?
No, he waged war.
Oh, I thought you were like one of
Nothing
these...
to do with wages.
I thought it was one of these Keeping Up with the Joneses storylines.
No. So this was an example, like I was saying earlier, of kind of the Wiltons often came off like worse even though they were, I guess, the nicer characters. I never really used to like Des, but it was always kind of funny to see them going through all this misery. Yeah. And then to get his own back, Derek snuck into Des's back garden and started making crop circles by strapping tennis rackets to his feet and stamping over the grass, as you do. But yeah, Des had photographed him doing it and showed it to the locals in the Rovers, which made Derek even more of a laughing stock.
Hampshire is the home of crop circles, by the way.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Well, it's too complicated to get into.
Look it up on Google. 1994 was when we met Norris Cole, and he's been in it 20 years now, and it's all because of this chance encounter with Derek. And I expect that there was never kind of imagined that Norris would still be in it all this time later. But basically, Derek and Mavis had gone off on a coach trip to London, but Derek was accidentally left at a service station, and that's where he meets Norris, who gives him a lift home. Turns up a few weeks later, I think, having left his wife, and then promptly moved in with them, much to Mavis's annoyance, I'm sure. Norris introduced Derek to the world of pyramid selling, and he invested in Envirosphere humidifiers, but unlike Norris, he was barely able to sell a thing. So it was kind of funny that Norris is the master salesman, because we think of Norris now as being the fairly...
a bumbling idiot.
Yeah, the incompetent one, really, always comes off worse when it's between him and Rita, but he was at the top of his game in 1994. Derek eventually unloaded them on Angela, who hired him at her stationery firm.
How many stationery firms are there in Manchester?
It's very important.
It's like a really cutthroat business, isn't it?
Yes. So he was thrown out by Mavis after Angela cited him in her divorce case, although they were reconciled through the death of their budgie.
Aww.
In 1990, that was when Norris started... 1995, yeah, that was when Norris started seeing Angela. So this was Derek's ex-wife, remember? And he became the chairman of her company. Derek bought 2 gnomes, Arthur and Guinevere, later that year, but Arthur kept on disappearing and sending postcards from around the world. Eventually, even Arthur's ear appeared in the post. It turned out that it was Norris having a jolly jape, but in revenge, Derek drove him to the wrong church for his wedding to Angela. That was one of the original kind of silly stories in Corrie, and I remember back when, in the early 2000s, when some of the storylines were getting more issue driven and people were saying, oh, this story's a bit rubbish, it's a bit silly, and they're just kind of suspension of disbelief, really, all these crazy things happening, and people were saying, well, the stupidest storyline was this gnome story.
I remember it being in the paper.
No, yeah, it was just silly. It was, but I mean, these days, silly stories are 10 a penny, really, aren't they?
Somebody did that to our babysitter, my babysitter.
What,
they
stole
stole
their
her
gnomes?
name, yeah, and sent postcards from
Really?
around the world, yeah.
Oh, inspired by Coronation Street.
Yeah, I don't really know what happened.
Oh, good
I've
story.
asked my mum
really
about
good story.
Sorry.
1996, Derek grew suspicious that Norris had murdered Angela because his marriage to her went just as well as Derek's did, but actually he was just burying her golf clubs under the Wilton's allotment, not actually the body of Angela
Was this
herself.
before or after the Brookside under the patio thing?
I don't know, it must have been around the same
Do you reckon
kind
it
of
was
time,
like a
wasn't
bit
it?
of a nod and a wink?
Yeah, probably. And 1997 was the end of Derek. He had an amazing green car with a giant paperclip on top for his stationery job, and that was what led to the road rage incident. He was driving, I think he was driving down to maybe his birthday party, maybe, and he got in a confrontation with this horrible guy that was making fun of his giant paperclip.
You've got to defend your honour, haven't you? There's absolutely no
when
choice.
there's a giant paperclip involved, yeah. Derek had a heart attack and died, and then the last we saw of him was flopped off across the 2 front seats in his car, which is very sad. And
Road rage was also very topical.
Road rage was really topical around then. That's when that song came out, wasn't it? The Catatonia song. When Mavis turned against the neighbours at his funeral. Norris always used to call Derek Dirk, and he got up in the middle of Derek's funeral and said a bit of a speech, which was a bit of an embarrassment to Mavis. And then at the end, back at the Wiltons' house, she just basically, I think she must have ordered everyone out, if I remember rightly, or said, Derek was just a joke to you. Why are you all here? You just want to have a gossip and a bit of a laugh. But I loved him. It was quite a powerful scene, I think. Yeah, quite a touching scene. But yeah, that was the end of Derek, because he'd been axed by Brian Park,
dun, dun, dun.
Who he swung his axe on quite a few people back then, and it was rumoured that this was what also caused Thelma Barlow to quit as Mavis, because I think probably by the end of '97 she was gone as well. She's since denied this though. On his axing, Peter Baldwin has said, "At the time, I couldn't believe it. In fact, I can't even remember my response, as it was so shocking and sad because it removed any possibility of returning later on."
I always think it's sad when they do kill off characters without like the actor's permission, almost. Do you know what I mean? I think the actors should have a say, and obviously that would be insane. But it does seem sad.
Well, I think he must have done it because he didn't like the idea that there were older characters, because Brian Park was very much like, let's take it into the 90s, let's modernise it, and we don't want these fuddy-duddies, Derek and Mavis. But it was a shame because he was a bit of an institution. He could have
still been in it now.
Brian Packham's exit recently really sort of reminded me of it, because he was very much that kind of character, kind of a bit funny, but lovable, kind of buffoon, harmless, exactly. But when Brian obviously didn't have the legs that Derek had on the show. Brian was only in it for a few years, but it was a huge shock when he was sacked. Very sad.
He's carried on with a bit of TV work, and he's still friends with Thelma Barlow and Sue Nichols. And off the screen, he started working at Benjamin Pollock's toy shop in 1980. And
that was I think in between when he was on and off Corrie in the early years.
Then he became a partner in the business. And he's also very into toy theatres, which are sort of paper constructions of like various layers that you can kind of open out and create like an illusion of depth with different layers.
Yeah, well, we went up to this toy shop last year, didn't we? When we went up to London, and there were those things.
They were exquisite little pieces of art, really, and they were quite good prices. I thought they looked like they'd be a lot more expensive than they were.
I don't know who buys them these days, though, to be honest.
Well, he says it's lovely. You stand behind and quite simply operate the whole thing. You push the characters on and off, change the steering wheel, take the curtains up and down, change the lighting. You're totally in charge. It's an actor's dream.
Well, he said in the same interview that I got this quote from, that he got a toy theatre when he was little, and that was like one of the things that inspired him to work on the stage.
See, I can imagine a sort of well-behaved child being given one of these things and looking after it. I think I would have probably trashed it when I was a kid because I was very careless. Don't know if you realise that. I'm quite a bit messy.
Yes.
You have to take very good care of these things because they're very delicate.
Yeah, well, he's obviously it's been a lifelong passion of his, and I think he's got a book about toy theatres as well.
Really?
I think so, yeah.
I thought they were beautiful. I did.
Yeah. I'm not into old-fashioned toys, but I can appreciate
the toy shop is very kind of like vintage.
Yeah, I can appreciate the craftsmanship that goes into making them, definitely.
And he did reappear,
Derek,
in a Corrie capacity, should we say. He haunted Norris Cole as a ghost in a 2012 edition of Text Santa.
This is non-canon,
which is such an awful name for a programme.
It's the charity, the Christmas thing that they do.
I know, but why do they call it Text Santa? It's just awful.
It's about texting your donations, isn't it?
I know, but can they think of a name for the programme?
Well, I don't know. In this little skit, it was Christmas Carol, wasn't it? Where Norris was really playing hilarious. Ebenezer Scrooge.
I loved it.
And I can't remember which of the ghosts that Derek was. Yeah, it's very funny. So it's nice that his
legacy is continuing.
Yeah, and the fact that the split with Corrie was far from acrimonious. It's good that he's the bridges have been rebuilt in some small capacity. Yeah, no, we emailed Peter Baldwin this week. Well,
This is
we
our
emailed.
special
This is our
surprise,
special.
everybody.
Yeah,
An
unless you go on Facebook or Twitter
A
and read that.
Conversation Street
Exclusive, and we can't say that very often. I emailed the toy shop earlier this week just to see if he had anything to say about his time as Derek.
And he did.
He replied, so thank you very much,
email.
Peter, for replying.
Yeah.
And this is what he said. My years spent working on Coronation Street were very happy ones. It was hugely enjoyable to be part of that company, and working with Thelma was an additional bonus as we had known each other long before Mavis and Derek were thought of. We were both members of the West of England Theatre Company, based in Exmouth in the 1950s, and later at the old Bristol Old Vic we played Mr. and Mrs. Fainall in The Way of the World, so marriage in the street was eventually inevitable. Our scenes in the cabin with Barbara Knox were always fun, teetering on a knife edge very often as we, or maybe mostly me, were prone to corpsing, giggling when we shouldn't. I returned to the set a year or so ago to be part of the Christmas special. It was a bit surreal to be back in the studio where so much had happened in the 21 years of Derek's existence, and I was so pleased to catch up with a considerable number of the crew still there. Happy times. Love and good wishes to all. P.S. I'm still to be found occasionally on the toy shop that I own in Covent Garden, London, Benjamin Pollock's toy shop. It's wonderful how many people visiting either know I might be there or are surprised to see me. Last week, 2 separate families from Canada were astonished to find me. The programme is still very popular there.
I'd heard
that it is popular in Canada.
I wish I was a fly on the wall for that, to see their faces when they walk in and they're like, oh my god.
The thing is, it was 20 years ago that he left Corrie, and he does look obviously 20 years older since then. And I think when we went to see him, and we knew it was him and we were expecting him, but I can completely imagine us going there and not even noticing that it was him. I think I could have quite easily not recognised him,
honest,
because you don't
Michael,
expect to see them, do you?
You don't look at people's faces. I would have recognised him, and I never saw him in the programme.
But the thing is, would we have been kind of brave enough to say, "Are you Peter Baldwin? Are you Derek?"
No, I would have gone. We're going to round the corner and gone, Michael, is that guy that was on Coronation Street?
And only that to gone in and stared. He must be used to people staring at him. Well, when we went, we were a bit too scared to talk to him, weren't we?
I bought a postcard.
You did. Well, I think if we go back to Covent Garden and we go up to his toy shop, now we've
broken the ice.
Yeah, we can. We'll go and say hello.
Now he knows that we're crazy stalker fans.
Yeah.
He'll be really excited to actually meet us in person.
Yeah. So that was really cool to get an email from him.
That was really awesome.
Glad I wrote.
He's a great guy, really, isn't he?
Yeah.
Just that quote just goes to show you what a great sort of the love of the craft just kind of.
Yeah, because I imagine that there's lots of ex-cast members that drawn a line under it and they wouldn't want to even talk about it anymore.
Sometimes the comments that people give, especially modern celebrities, shall we say, it's so kind of like you can tell they're only in it because they want to be famous. Whereas from what he's saying, he absolutely loves theatre, and he just enjoyed being part of a creative process with like a group of really talented
it's been
actors.
His life.
Yeah.
And he spends his elderly days working in this toy shop with
selling toy theatres to continue his legacy.
Yeah, so it's really, really cool. So it's great to hear from him. I just wish there were more older characters like him in Coronation Street now, because there's so many younger ones. We probably talked about it before, but there's just not very much. They don't need it. It'd be good to see an older couple move in, because they couldn't have the storylines with the affairs or quite so much, and they wouldn't have the children. That's true. They wouldn't have. And Dennis, actually. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think you are wrong.
But I'd like to see more. I mean, Sharif is the latest kind of older acquisition.
Why do you keep calling everyone old?
I'm just comparing him to the likes of kind of Tina's age, which there's more of in Coronation Street at the moment. Yeah. But, there was Derek.
That was our character profile of the excellent Derek Wilton. There we go. A character profile of somebody that I hadn't seen. You had. Now I've seen him. Love him. Think he's
Yeah,
fantastic.
you kind of knew about Derek through Reputation, I suppose, didn't you? And same with Mavis. I mean, at the time, you hadn't seen him at all in the show, but we've obviously recently been rewatching some of those episodes from the 80s and 90s, and I'm really glad that he made a good impression of you, because I thoroughly enjoyed the partnership that was Mavis and Derek. It's only recently we've ended up doing the Mavis character profile, isn't it? We talked a little bit about that in this one and said, it's going to be a little while before we profile Mavis. Little did we know at the time it would be about 6 years before we talked about her in depth. But really great couple. I was definitely surprised, even though we talked about it, I suppose, when we watched the old episodes, that Derek was such an infrequent character in the early years. He really did kind of swan in for a little bit on his his capacity as a sales rep or whatever, and then he disappeared off for another couple of years. And that relationship between Mavis and Derek took like a decade to get going, didn't it?
I know, it really was quite funny. The dithering.
Yeah, but it was absolutely perfect for them.
It worked really well, and it's one of those things where it's difficult to know if it's deliberate, because it worked perfectly to sort of demonstrate the character, and not very many programmes can do something where a story takes years to get going, to sort of hammer home the fact that these two are chronic ditherers.
And it certainly was very within character for them to have the double jilting at the wedding as well.
Loved it.
Couldn't have been anyone else.
Legendary.
It's so funny, even though we like Derek, even though he was a massive arse to Mavis, wasn't he?
He was.
Especially in the early days when he was, when he got the canteen of cutlery, which...
Whenever I picture, if I close my eyes and picture Derek, it's always, and I don't know if this even happened in the show, him sort of proffering a canteen of cutlery to Mavis and then sort of going, but no.
It's for my mum. And there was the one where he was getting her to look through
the catalogue
for holidays or something, and he was actually taking his sister abroad. Mavis was such a glutton for punishment, but it was just a really, really funny watch. And miss him terribly on the show.
He was great.
Such a sad death
but,
as well.
Yeah, it was a really sad and very dramatic and shocking death for many reasons, one of them being the fact that he was such a beloved character, and that Brian Park decided to give him the boot.
Because we've obviously heard Thelma Barlow talking just recently. She was on the Distinct Nostalgia podcast last year talking about partly about the fact that she decided that she wanted to leave, so therefore they got rid of Peter Baldwin.
Yes, because I think on the podcast, I think on the profile, I'm pretty sure we talked about the fact that she left after he died.
Yeah.
And we weren't sure whether she left because of how badly he'd been treated, but actually it was sort of the other way around.
Yeah.
Interesting to know the real stories behind the plot lines on Coronation Street, and sometimes they're more dramatic than the show itself. I don't think there's anything much more dramatic than dying of a heart attack after you
road rage
incident. In a car with a giant stapler on the top.
Classical music playing as well, that Tit Willow music, which is perfect.
Classical. It's not classical music. Tit Willow. I
don't know.
It's a what's it called? Country song. What's that?
I don't know.
Urban legends. No. What's it called? Folk
music.
Yes, folk music. So classical music. Oh, anything.
Music from the past.
Like the Spice Girls.
Shut up. Anyway.
Yes, the end.
No more to say, everybody.
Thank
Goodbye.
you
See you next time. We'll be back with the normal podcast at the weekend. See you then.